Our panel will be discussing some very interesting and informative tales from the trenches where digital forensics played an important role in the outcome. A couple of notes before we start. We do welcome questions, and you can submit them via the Q&A button or the chat button on the screen there. Looks like chat is working, which is better than I did last time when I hadn't turned it on for everybody, so that's good. We will try to get to as many questions as we can over the course of the webinar, and we'll look to leave some time at the end for additional questions. We also welcome your comments in the chat. If you have thoughts or resources to share or anything, comments, please feel free to do so. We really want to make this an interactive discussion. Hopefully this time, I'd like to say I did remember to turn the chat on for everybody. And it looks like I did because somebody's got their note taker going. So also, please note that you'll receive a copy of the slides after the webinar. So look for those either later today or tomorrow. So now let's meet the panelists for today's webinar, and we'll start with Karuna. Karuna Naik is Director of Forensics and Disputes at S2 Data with over 25 years of experience in IT and digital forensics. She has a Bachelor of Science honors degree in mathematics with computing and a Master of Science degree in communicating computer systems. Karuna has experience managing the network infrastructure, desktop, and data center environments of trading floor companies and played a key role in global disaster recovery and business continuity planning, which was successfully executed during the events of 9/11. She also has experience as a NOC engineer before joining S2 Data, where her strong technical skills have taken her to her current role of Director of Forensics and Disputes. Karuna has led investigations across a spectrum of data sources, including mobile devices, Windows and Mac OS environments, cloud platforms, security systems, and digital storage and matters ranging from IP theft and employee investigations to accident analysis and criminal cases, and has at times provided expert testimony. Hi, Karuna.
Hi, Doug. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Greg Freemeyer has over 40 years experience in the IT field, starting as an IT consultant with numerous firms, including Siemens and Ford Motor Company, where he worked on an anti-fraud effort for almost 10 years. For 5 years, Greg served as S2 Data's Director of Forensics and Disputes and transitioned to his current role in 2022, leading their forensic tools development team. With a broad background in investigative computer forensics and data breach response, Greg has worked as a digital forensic expert since 2015, leading and participating in numerous investigations to determine the nature and scope of computer and smartphone incidents and any potential data loss, including IP theft events, accident cases, and cases involving video and security systems. In his R&D role, he's leading efforts to develop tools and solutions targeting email and text message communications. I did see a raised hand, but if you have a question, please put it in the chat or the Q&A. It looks like the chat seems to be working, at least for AI assistance. So please do so if you have a question. Michael Crawford has been a digital forensic examiner at S2 Data for nearly 3 years. He leads day-to-day forensic collections and analysis across Android and iOS, Windows and Mac OS systems, cloud storage platforms, and enterprise environments while supervising a team of examiners. Michael's casework frequently involves IP theft and accident investigations, and he's provided signed declarations in IP-related matters. Before specializing in digital forensics, Michael supported international infrastructure operations, and he has supported forensics operations in various countries throughout the world. Michael holds a BBA degree in Management Information Systems with a concentration in information technology. He's spoken at CLE programs for the legal industry and is scheduled to present Preserving Mobile Device Data in Litigation at the Oxygen Forensics Legacy and Logic International Conference later this month. And I'm Doug Austin. I'm the editor of eDiscovery Today, which is a daily blog about e-discovery, cybersecurity, data privacy, information governance, and AI trends, best practices, and case law. I've been providing consulting and project management services in the legal space for over 30 years, so I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two. And I've been daily blogging for over 15 years now, so I'm either committed or I ought to be. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. First, we'll talk about a situation that happened to me and how digital evidence, potentially smoking gun digital evidence, played a role in determining what happened. Then our forensic experts will take over, discussing several cases they've actually worked, how they were able to identify important digital evidence that helped their clients, and what the outcome was in each case. And as I mentioned, we'll look to leave some time for questions at the end as well as work in questions along the way to the extent we can. Of course, any ideas expressed by us here today are our own, not those of our organization, clients, or partners. The recording of this webinar serves as digital evidence that we remembered to issue a disclaimer. So let's start our webinar off with a situation that actually happened to me recently. I was at a restaurant with my wife Paige and a couple of friends when I received a text that said, "Hello, Mr. Mrs. Douglas Austin. Your parked GLC 300 4MATIC off-roader had a parking damage. Mercedes-Benz Collision Care will call you shortly to assist you." So my friend Greg and I decided to go check on the car in the parking lot, which was a short distance from the restaurant. That day it was a bit overcast and drizzly, and our car was pretty dirty. And Greg and I looked it over we thought pretty thoroughly, and didn't see any damage. But I noticed that my car was a little crooked in the parking spot, but still within the lines. So I thought I would straighten it up. And when I turned my car on to do that, this message was on the dashboard console. So obviously the car indicated that it had had a collision. And if you'll note the time there, it's 3 p.m. on 9/6 or September 6th. But since we didn't see any damage, we returned to the restaurant. After eating, we returned to the car, and this time we noticed there was a note stuck in the windshield. The note included the plate number of the person who hit me and the phone number of the lady whose name was Laura, leaving the note. For privacy considerations, by the way, I've redacted all personal information from the story, so just keep that in mind. This time, when we looked at the car, we did find a minor scrape on the left rear fender and left rear wheel well. So, and honestly, that was easy to miss. So I texted Laura and I said, "Thanks for the note. And yes, please send me the picture." Laura actually told me that she left a first note, and amazingly, the lady who hit our car went back around and took it off, which is crazy. So thankfully for her, thankfully for us, I should say, she left a second note, which was the one we found when we came back. So thank goodness for Laura. So here's the picture from her iPhone she sent with metadata, which you can easily view on an iPhone by simply sliding the picture up. The Subaru in white there seems to be leaving a parking spot that was right next to our car in green there. Note the time, 3 p.m. on Saturday, September 6th, same exact time as the message displayed on my car. Want more? Here's a close-up of her car in the picture. And if you look at the corner of the front bumper, it's damaged right where it would likely have made contact with our left rear fender and left rear wheel well when she pulled out of the parking spot. So what do you think? Does this seem like smoking gun evidence to you? Feel free to throw some comments in the chat. And while you're responding via chat, I'll turn to Greg on this. So, Greg, what's your take on this situation, and how does this reflect the digital world we live in today?
It's just the ubiquitousness of digital evidence. We see things like this all the time. 15 years ago, happening to get a photograph you'd never get. And now it's just routine. Not only that, but the quality. Go back 15 or 20 years ago, the camera to take a picture, the quality we get off of iPhones today would have been a $5,000 camera. I mean, I remember I used to work in a field where I wrote software for dentists, and we required the dentist to buy a $10,000 camera to take pictures of teeth. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's what was required to get the high quality you needed. Today, you just pull it out of your pocket, you take a picture, and you're done. And it's truly amazing what we carry around in our pocket today versus what was even available 20 years ago.
Yeah,
So
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no,
Yeah.
I was done.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, many of us don't even bother to take a fancy camera on trips anymore because the iPhone or Android cameras on these devices can do it all. So Karuna, when you have a client with multiple forms of modern digital evidence, as illustrated in an example like this, how do you work with your client to ensure that the evidence you need is preserved in a format that can be authenticated and used in presentation activities such as deposition or during trial?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing really is to identify the data sources, the correct data sources. So what we do as a company is we actually have a document that we send out that has different categories of data. It could be cloud data, it could be cell phones, laptops, storage devices. There's a whole variety of data sources or potential data sources that a custodian could have their data located in. We send that document out to our clients, which are typically law firms, and then they in turn will sit down with the custodian and review the data sources that the custodian has. Sometimes they'll send the document across to the custodian and have them fill it in, and then have the discussion. So we use that initially to determine what the data sources are, and then from there we can let the custodians know and our clients know the best way to forensically preserve the data. And of course, we follow protocols within the company. We provide chain of custody documentation. So we're tracking the evidence, from start to finish. So we have, integrity across the data and the collection methods that we use to collect the data from the devices. We also keep track of all of that. So at any one time, if our client comes to us and wants to know what was collected, when it was collected, we can provide that information, and additionally how it was collected. So we track the forensic tools, the software versions, the drives that the data is collected to, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and really, those are must those are things you must do these days. So Hans maybe says this isn't 100% smoking gun, but certainly a good head start. The damage could have already been there. That's certainly possible. But certainly the timing does seem interesting. So we'll see what happens with that situation. But now let's get into some digital forensic tales from the trenches from our panelists. And our first one discusses the source of ESI. Now, I mean, we've already talked about mobile devices here. It's become common in discovery forensics. So, Greg, I'll start with you on this one. In our prep call, you talked about working with a client who didn't exactly adhere to his obligations in discovery. So, could you talk about that case and how you handled that situation?
Absolutely. But before I start on this one, I wanted to follow up on what Karuna said. So we actually have a situation right now. It happened on Friday. The opposing counsel asked for, you provide a list of all the things you collected and searched. And we did that, and they came back and gave us a list of things we missed. And it's like the lawyers, they're engaging, I'm sure, their own experts, but they're paying a lot of attention to all these repositories. You can't just say, oh, I grabbed the phone and I'm done. In this case, they were asking, did you go to the iCloud and pull down their iCloud drive and their iCloud photos? And the answer is we didn't. So why is that not relevant? Well, I think the answer is going to be because they didn't have anything in those repositories, or we got the photos off the phone. But we have to do a little more research on our own end to make sure we were comprehensive. So it's really much more challenging to be comprehensive than people realize. It's not just grab the phone anymore. Data gets
Sure.
spread out and sent everywhere. And I'm going to be talking about that in this example, as a matter of fact. So about 5 years ago, it was right at the start of COVID, actually, because I was out in the client site or the law firm when I was found out that the city of Atlanta was on lockdown and I wasn't near my house. So, and the reason I put that big old truck on that picture, this involved engineers that designed mining equipment, a very interesting case. I always find the nature of the case interesting on these things. So as engineers that worked in high-end equipment, I mean, that might be a $500,000 piece of equipment you're looking at right there. They had lots and lots of data, just tremendous amounts of data. And I was caught a little bit unaware. often we walk into these scenarios where we're going to a deposition and we're being asked to preserve the items that the person brings to the deposition. Well, the picture in the center there, or the right, I guess, for everybody with the laptops and the iPhones and the digital storage devices and the watches and the external storage, that is not as complicated as what I walked into. There were more of all of those. There were more watches, more phones, more Macs, and then the Mac Airs of those time were actually 4 terabyte internal storage. And this is 5 years ago. And the extra there at the bottom, you see those just look like vertical disk drive holders. That's pretty much what those are. They had 20 terabytes of external storage. So I was a bit overwhelmed walking into this. They pointed me at this corner, and I think I ended up with 50 pieces of evidence, counting my drives holding the evidence, plus all this original evidence. Um, so it was just a very, very large case, and I'm already a bit overwhelmed. And so they go off and they start doing depositions. And that went on for 2 or 3 days because there was a lot to talk about. And I'm in the conference room with all this equipment doing my imaging. And one of the lawyers comes in and says, "We just deposed one of the engineers. And one of the first things we asked him is if he deleted anything recently." And he said, "Oh, yeah, last night I deleted about 5,000 text messages off my phone." And both sets of lawyers, of course, had a heart attack. Um, and they said, "Why would you do that?" "Well, somebody told me it'd be smart to get rid of all those old text messages because they might hurt our case." Well, as everybody on this call hopefully knows, that's a direct spoliation type situation. And so we ended up being, or I primarily, but the company, because this was my case, uh, had to go find an effort to recover those 5,000 deleted text messages. And what we found, it was actually a lot more than 5,000. It was probably 5,000 conversations. I don't know how much it was. But what we determined in that case, and we hadn't really come across it yet, because this was again 5 years ago, a little over, was messages in iCloud. And if a client or a phone owner turns on the fact that they want to share their text messages between, say, their phone and their watch, or their phone and their MacBook Air, it does sets up a synchronization repository in the cloud called Messages in iCloud. And in this particular case, the messages in iCloud had not synced yet with the phone. And so we were able to go into that and get those messages from the messages in iCloud and just pull it all down. And I came to a conclusion that we recovered about 95% of the messages that were deleted on let's say Wednesday night. When I did this collection on Thursday, because it was very quick. It was just the night before the deposition, and they came to me immediately upon hearing about what had happened. So I'm just down the hall. Um, and we recovered all that data. It's because we were fast and because we found this additional repository. And I must have already known about it because I was collecting from it within minutes of being told this is a real problem. And then another interesting aspect of this situation, I hadn't worked with Apple Watches before. And we're all used to, we plug in a USB device or a USB cable and we pull all the data down. We might be using Celebrite as an example, or Oxygen or Axiom. There's various tools that can do these collections, and we have access to most of those. But watches do not have a port. There's no physical port. They only talk via Bluetooth, or these particular ones also had cellular service. So, because these were very successful engineers, they had money. They didn't worry about, oh, do I need the $500 watch or the $1,000 watch? They just got the $1,000 watch.
Gotcha.
So what we ended up having to do with the watches, because there was no support at that time in the tools that we had for collecting from the watch, but they absolutely wanted the data because of the potential spoliation issue. We sat down there with a specialized camera and we took a picture of every text message on the devices, on the watches. And so just a very interesting case to me.
Yeah, and you really by collecting those from the cloud, you really kind of saved your client in that situation, which is key.
Well,
Peter points out a great case on a Supreme Court case, Riley versus California, which is one from several years ago. A great case to check out if you're not familiar with it, with regards to, the ability to, get into a cell for law enforcement to get into a cell phone and why a subpoena is required. So great tip there, Peter. So, Karina, sometimes the loss of data is unintentional. You don't have somebody who just says, "Oh, I should delete these because they're going to hurt my case." So, could you talk about a data recovery example for mobile device data where you helped a client?
Yeah, I can talk about a personal experience as well as a client experience. I'll start with the personal experience, and I'm sure you'll all have a good laugh. I was out fishing with my family and some friends. I'd never gone fishing before, and one of my friends, he said to me, he was showing me how to fish, how to cast and everything. So I've got the fishing rod in my hand, and I go to cast, and I actually hook in the hook. I managed to grab my drawstring bag that was lying right next to me on the
Oh
dock.
boy.
And I'm on a dock, and there's no railing, there's no, it's just completely open. It's an old style dock. And that drawstring bag, I grab onto the hook, and it goes into the water. And my daughter is absolutely horrified because her cell phone is in that bag. Of course, it gets completely soaking wet, and there was nothing we could do to actually get that device back to a working condition. Even though my daughter insisted, we need to put it in rice, we need to do this, we need to do that. It was just a dead device, unfortunately. Thankfully, she did have iCloud backup enabled on her device, and we were able to get her a new phone and then restore the iCloud backup down to the phone, and she hadn't lost anything, thankfully. But that was a personal experience that I had. And then we've had some cases where unintentional data loss has occurred. Sometimes it is intentional or unintentional. We had a case where a custodian was out. I believe he was out in the sea somewhere, and he decided to drop his phone into the ocean. And that wasn't the smartest thing for him to do because the data on the phone did need to be preserved. So in that particular case, we were able to, think similar to my story, restore a phone. Actually, it was an S2 data test phone. We were able to restore the iCloud backup down to the phone, and then additionally sync the iCloud messages that Greg mentioned earlier also down to the phone, because the original device did have iCloud messages enabled. So we were then able to perform an extraction from our test device, and we were able to recover the data that was required. And for this particular case, it was text messages and WhatsApp data.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to, preserve that data, and the custodian then was not facing a spoliation, claim or a spoliation issue, sanction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I remember covering a case a couple of years ago involving the city of Seattle, where but some curiously things happened to the mobile device of the mayor, the police chief, and the fire chief, and the mayor's phone got dropped in basically in the river. So they all lost because they didn't have cloud backups. They all lost their data. And my personal experience is getting into a hot tub one time, and kind of like sitting there for a while, and then just it's like you kind of touch and you realize, uh-oh, my phone is in my pocket, and you're like, oh, that's a sinking feeling. But thankfully, because of cloud backup, yes, I had to get a new phone, but at least I hadn't lost my data. So it's good to have those capabilities. So. We'll move on
hey,
to the
Doug.
next example. Yes,
Yeah,
yes, real quick,
one
Greg.
comment on that one from on Karuna's. So I was the one that had the pleasure of responding to that situation. So I got a call about 9 or 10 o'clock at night on, let's say it was a Tuesday, and the call was, "Can you be in California?" And I live in Atlanta. "Can you be in California tomorrow morning by noon?" And the answer was not an immediate yes, but it became a yes. But that's important for lawyers to understand. When these scenarios happen, you have to urgently address them. Don't wait a week, don't wait a month. Do it now.
Right.
And even if we fail, at least you can tell the court we did our best. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's key. Effort means something to the courts, and if your best you've given the best effort, at least there's that, and that's definitely for sure notable. I love Kyle's comment about dropping the phone in the toilet while a recording was going on, and you could hear the bubbles of the water. So that's pretty funny. Gotta say, but we'll move on to our next example because there's other types of things that we're looking at here, and I'm sure many of you like to probably pay attention to the health data you get through your mobile device and smartwatch. And I know I feel a true sense of accomplishment when I get praised by my iPhone that I closed all 3 exercise rings. So that certainly makes my day. Karuna, health data is not only useful to help us make sure we're doing the things we need to do to stay healthy, but it can also be useful info to support your case. So could you talk about a situation where it supported your client's claims related to a truck accident?
Yes. And, we've had a number of cases where health data has been critical in the case, and the evidence that we found just by looking at the health data has really either made or broken a case. So the example I'll talk about today is it's actually a truck driver. He's driving down a 3-lane highway. He's driving in the right-hand lane, so the slowest lane. And then he does see a pedestrian. It was a homeless woman who was kind of walking on the side of the road. And she would kind of veer into the driving lane, the right-hand driving lane from time to time. But, he was cautious. He knew that she was walking there and to be wary. The issue he had was he could not pull into the left, into the middle lane to actually go around her because there were vehicles in that lane. So he had no choice but to stay in his lane and kind of pull over to the left-hand side of his lane to try and, make sure he doesn't run into her. As he's driving past her, she decides to kind of take a step or two into his lane. So he ends up clipping her with his wing mirror on his right-hand side wing mirror. Of course, he realizes that he's clipped her and, he's driving a truck. So he slows down and then he stops and pulls over to the side of the road. As he's pulled over to the side of the road, he's got out of his truck and then he started walking down to obviously help her. He can't turn his vehicle around on a highway to go back and help her. So he's got, at least 100 yards, maybe more than that. I can't remember offhand, but maybe more than that. And he's had to walk back. As he's got out of his truck and he's, attempted to make a phone call to his dispatch, he actually receives an incoming call from his girlfriend at that time, just coincidentally. He tells her he's had an accident and then he hangs up. That call was really short. I think it was like a 5-second call. After that call, he hangs up. He actually calls his dispatch, and that's, the rules and regulations for his particular trucking company. He called dispatch and let them know that he had clipped somebody and he's walking back to try help this person. So that's a call that he placed outgoing. The call from his girlfriend is an incoming call. After he gets off the call with dispatch, he ends up calling 911. And I believe that's to give them an exact location from where he was calling from, because, he's in the middle of a highway between cities. So all of these timestamps are kind of logged. On the slide that you see, we've kind of exaggerated the time in minutes. So we've got the incident happened at 3:07 p.m. As soon as he's got out of his truck, the health app on the cell phone has recorded he's walking. So 3:09 p.m., the health app kicked in and figured out that he's walking. He places a phone call, he receives the phone call, and then he makes the phone call all of these things typically happened within a few seconds, except for the call with dispatch. That was a longer call. But he was accused of being on the phone while he clipped the lady that was walking. And, you know, he was accused of being on the phone and being a distracted driver. And we were able to prove that he actually wasn't on the phone at all. He hadn't been on the phone for at least a couple of hours into his drive. And we were able to prove that the phone call was placed after he started walking. And the incoming phone call from his girlfriend was received after he started walking. So that was huge for the case. And, you know, we've done a lot of work for this particular client. Every time I speak to this client on the phone for a new case, he always brings up this project because, and this case and the work we did on it. And he always tells me, he tells all his colleagues and his, you know, lawyer friends about this case and how we were able to prove just using the health data that this person was not, you know, the driver was not on the phone at the time of the accident.
Yeah, that's really key to have that kind of level of tracking, and health data really does. I mean, I've seen, you know, obviously there's been 48 hours in Datelines where somebody has been either you know, it's helped convict somebody or helped exonerate somebody, like their Fitbit or things like that. So, you know, and data on their mobile devices as well, the health data. So definitely a great example there that really illustrates how mobile devices aren't just about the text messages; they're about a lot of other things too that can be really important. So,
Doug,
yeah, real quick,
let me
Greg.
talk about the choice that has to be made when you preserve a phone.
Mhm.
Often we ask, do you want us just to collect the logical data, the text messages, the photographs, that information, or do you want us to do a comprehensive collection on the phone? In this particular case, we came along second. The police did a collection there at the accident scene, but they did not do a comprehensive collection, and so they didn't have the health data. So the attorney general that was prosecuting didn't know the information about the walking. Fortunately, the phone immediately came to us from law enforcement, and we did the full comprehensive collection. We didn't even know we had this useful data for 18 months because it just sort of sat in limbo. Nothing was really going on. We just did a preservation. But 18 months later, when the attorney reached out and said, "Do you have anything that can help? They're trying to charge my truck driver and throw him in jail." And then we were able to help. So the selection of what is being preserved is oh so critical.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree more. And then, of course, you know, to obtain evidence from a mobile device, you need to be able to get into a mobile device in the first place. You know, forensic experts like Michael, Greg, and Karuna, you know, can do so with something known as a pin break. So, Michael, I'll turn to you for this one. Could you tell our audience what a pin break is?
Yeah, so obviously password cracking's been around for a long time in various forms. With cell phones, it's obviously something where we have to have the physical device in hand, and we essentially try a number of combinations to enter device. And typically, a user only has 10 attempts before you're locked out of a phone. I know on iPhones that's the case, and it varies on Androids, but a pin break, we're able to kind of get around that restriction that prevents you from doing multiple attempts. So we can try virtually limitless attempts to try and get into a phone. Um, One of the things there is there's two primary types of pin breaks. It's going to be a brute force attack or a dictionary attack. Depending on how your PIN code is set up, if it's a 4-digit PIN code, there's only 10,000 combinations. It could be once you go up to a 6-digit, it jumps up to a million combinations. And you can see where I'm going with this. It just keeps rising and rising. So 4-digit, 6-digit, it would really just be a dictionary attack where there's a certain combinations of number. We try one after the other until we find the one it is. Once you start going higher than that or get into alphanumeric combinations, that's when you hear about pin breaks taking, months, years, lifetimes, and you may never get in there just because of how complex that passcode is.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. And I remember a few years ago there was these San Bernardino shooter case where DOJ was trying to get into his phone. And ultimately, I think managed to, but there was some question as to whether they could, and Apple was concerned because they were trying to, I think, get Apple's help, but Apple was concerned about privacy, providing the ability that could jeopardize privacy rights. So, from your perspective, could you give us a couple of hypothetical scenarios where you and your team might be called upon to perform a pin break on a mobile device?
Yeah, sure. So I'm just gonna build off that San Bernardino one for a second. That's obviously where all this started, regarding the pin breaks. And from Apple's perspective, obviously it was a privacy issue, but I think even bigger from their perspective is they didn't want to set the precedent that they're going to get involved in every crime that an iPhone is found at, or has any relation to. Um, and that was when they had first, or around the time they had first introduced the secure enclave on the phone, where they're storing encryption keys on a separate chip on the phone. Um, so, someone had to spend months or years developing a method to try and get those keys out, because Apple just wasn't going to help with that. And obviously, finally, that method was developed, and it's just evolved to where we are today, where it's a little more, I don't want to say easy, but it's a more streamlined process at least. Um, but yeah, it's something that we see, somewhat frequently, in the situations it happens in. We have a client that often sends us devices from their departed employees when they leave the company. They were previously issued company-owned devices, laptops, phones, and we have a pretty good workflow with them. They send us the devices. We don't necessarily need direct instructions from them because we've already figured all that out. You send us a phone or a laptop, we're going to image that, and they will provide whatever encryption keys or PIN codes that we may need to access those devices. The issue is there's not always um, they're not always on the same page, the legal department and the IT team. So the legal department has it sent to us, but the IT team has been told this person has left, and then they delete their PIN codes or the passcodes out of their Active Directory. So we get the devices, like, okay, can you send us the PIN code? Oh, we don't have it anymore. And occasionally they can still communicate with the phone because they have mobile device management on it. They can just send an unlock code through. But it's probably 50-50, where sometimes they've just completely wiped it out. They have no record of the phone anymore. Um, so I guess you can just send it back to us if we can't get data off of it. And then we, tell them, well, this is your property. This is a company-owned device. And under that situation, you can give us permission to pin break it. And again, we tell them this might take a few days, a few weeks. It depends on the complexity, but typically it's those 6-digit pin codes, and a million combinations can be gotten through in a matter of days or a week or two. And it's not awful, and we can then proceed with the collection and the analysis of that data to get them what they need. Another situation is sometimes people have old devices, and if there's an active litigation involving someone, they might have their current phone, but there might be relevant data on an old phone that they have sitting in a drawer, but they don't know the passcode to it anymore. Another situation where, because it's in active litigation, we can take possession of that phone, um, and the attorneys can give us the go ahead to pin break that device. In some situations, like in an iPhone, you might be thinking, well, if it's the same Apple ID, can't you just get around it? Occasionally that's the case, but people change Apple IDs. You might not have the same Apple ID, I know I don't, as what I had 10 years ago. And even if you go through the resetting of that phone, it's going to come up with something called an activation lock, ask you for your Apple ID and password. And even if you get that right, it's going to once again ask you, so what was the PIN code to this device before it was wiped? And if you don't know it, you're in a tough situation there. So it's better to do it before that, obviously. Um, and like what Greg was saying a minute ago, involve someone in involve a forensic examiner before that, so you can at least know the options and what's available to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, the having the policy in place for with regards to company-owned devices, and obviously permission is key. But it's interesting to know that that capability is available when when you have the rights to that device, and that you're not dead in the water just because you don't know the PIN. Might take a while, but it is doable. So thanks, Michael. So. Another thing we do with mobile devices is track our location. I mean, Karuna, anybody who's seen a Dateline or 48 Hours episode knows the importance of location data in criminal cases these days, but you've had a civil case where location data was very important. So tell us about what happened in that case.
Yes, we've had actually quite a few cases where location data has been key. For this particular case, you can see on the slide, we've got Hotel A and Hotel B. So the background story for this is that there was a minor, I believe she was 15 years old. She was involved in a prostitution ring, and Hotel B's owners were accused of allowing prostitution to take place within their hotel on a regular basis and by a minor. So that's to cut a long story short. There's a longer version of it, but that's the long and those are the most important facts. So she was a heavy user. The minor was a heavy user of her cell phone. She would always take photos everywhere, and she was heavily texting as well. So the interesting part for this case is this was a criminal case. So we did not have the cell phone in our possession. The law enforcement officers that were working on the case performed a collection and extraction from the device itself. And they provided us a heavily redacted PDF document, which was thousands of pages long. It was a really long document because it had the full extraction of the device on it. And if she, think about how many text messages, she had thousands and thousands of text messages and thousands of photos and videos on her cell phone. So what we ended up having to do was go through that PDF document and pull out all the lat-long coordinates that we found in that document. And we're talking, hundreds and hundreds of these as well. We were not given access to even a filtered version of the extraction. It was only the PDF. So from those location coordinates, we were able to produce a map, map them, and then figure out where this phone had been over a certain time frame. And as you can see here, we were able to prove that the phone was actually located in Hotel A, all around the hotel. Each one of those pins that you see is not just one instance of when the phone was located there. There were multiple instances of when that device was located at Hotel A. But Hotel B, you can see that the cell phone wasn't there in that location at all. And the device was located around some of the restaurants and shops around Hotel A. But additionally, there was another hotel that was about 25 miles away from this Hotel A, where the cell phone also had a lot of location pins. So we were able to provide those details to our client, and then they did further investigation as to the other location of the hotel as well, because this activity was taking place in more than one hotel. So we were able to prove conclusively that Hotel B, the owners of Hotel B, there was no prostitution activity going on within their hotel for this particular cell phone.
Yeah, and it's I mean it's really interesting how the location is so pinpoint that they're literally right next to each other, and yet you're able to still show she was always over here, she was never over here, which is
Mhm.
really interesting. And that's the kind of degree of location I guess capabilities that exist today, which is really incredible. Couple of people pointing out challenges of legal and IT communications, and definitely I know we all see those a lot. So, and we have had a couple of good interesting questions, but we're going to try to get through our couple of last examples, and then I'll circle back to those. Our next example, I'm sure many of you have either been involved with or read a case about theft of IP by departing employees. And Greg, I know I've covered a lot of cases involving claims of IP theft by employees who either depart and then either go to a competitor or start their own business. So, could you talk about the forensic perspective of a case like that, a specific case you worked on, what you did, and what the outcome was?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to take this and do a intro to what the USB connection stuff is, and I'm going to hand it off to Michael for a different one because there's a real slant we want to discuss. But
Okay.
the first thing we almost always do when we're doing intellectual property theft by a departing employee is get their USB connection history. It's still 80% of the time that's what they're doing. They're plugging in a USB drive and they're putting data on there. We get all that collection data. I'm sorry, connection, not collection, all that connection data out of the various artifacts on the computer. We do an extremely good job of it. I don't think we miss much when it comes to connecting and disconnecting those devices. Connections are almost always in the artifacts because even if the computer is turned off when you plug it in, when you power it on, it registers a connection event. So there's always a connection event. Disconnects don't always show up because if you turn off the power to or shut down a computer while a USB device is connected, it does not log anything. So we always get the connections. We don't always get the disconnects, but still, it's very high quality data. And then we also get anytime the user browses, you take your file explorer and you go look around the drive. Most people, when they take stuff, they put data on their USB drive and then they go look to verify it got there. So we get that verification activity because they're browsing their own thumb drive or USB drive. We get any Excel spreadsheets or Word documents that they open after they've moved it there. People do that all the time. And then we correlate with access dates. If a thumb drive is plugged in for 15 minutes, we go look at every user document accessed during those 15 minutes on the computer. We can look right there. There's a last access date timestamp, and we correlate. Hey, he accessed 1,500 files during this 15 minutes. There's a very strong likelihood it got copied onto the thumb drive. And in my opinion, that's exactly what happened. So I render those opinions, I don't know, at least once a month, where I'm making an opinion that somebody has copied a large number of files onto a USB drive. But let me turn it over to Michael because he's got a fairly interesting case we're working on right now.
Okay.
Yeah, and it actually goes hand in hand with what someone just commented about bring your own device policies versus company owned devices. So we've got a case where um, a bank employee left where they were working and they did not have company owned devices. It was bring your own device. So they left the bank and there were obvious concerns about intellectual property being taken with this former employee. And the IT department even had evidence that there was nefarious activity going on either the day of or the day before this person's departure. So then we were brought in to verify that and then collect and analyze her devices. So in this case, it was laptops, cell phones, emails. It was really everything that might have been touched in terms and how it was related to the bank. Because aside from intellectual property that obviously they don't want being shared with competitors or just being common knowledge, there might have been member data on these devices personally identifiable information that if that makes it out to the public, that's a big issue for the bank. There's a lot of issues behind that. So we were tasked with essentially identifying whether there was any member data across these devices, to identify it. And then further than that, there had been a confidentiality uh, policy put in place by the judge, essentially, that we couldn't produce this data to the attorneys. It had to be reviewed by the judge. But obviously, the judge is not going to review all this data, so it falls back on us as the examiner to go through every email, every photo, um, and photos being a big one here because the phone was in play. So there's no easy way to go through photos. I'm sure a lot of people know about OCR where you can extract text from photos, but there's a lot of photos on someone's phone that either OCR doesn't work on or there is just no text, but it's still something that shouldn't be made public. So I mean, I personally have been through about 30,000 photos, uh, just
That's a
looking
lot.
for, yeah, and I have to make a determination of is this, just a random picture of a tree or a dog or whatever, or could this possibly be member data? And the judge has to then look at it and decide yes or no. Does it need to be remediated from the device, or can it be returned to the custodian? Um, so that's been a big issue in terms of if they just had a bring your own device policy, there might still have been issues, but it would have been limited to maybe email or like USB devices, like Greg was talking about, rather than the entirety of the custodian's devices, emails, pretty much everything that they may have touched.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a lot. A great comment from Julie about a case that I hadn't heard of, so I'll have to definitely check that out, where the court determined the third party didn't have to turn over text messages on a BYOD phone. Definitely BYOD is its own can of worms, if to put it mildly. And I definitely think that some of the AI technology is showing some potential in terms of being able to identify what's on pictures, images that you could maybe then make the process easier. Thank you, Julie, for the case site. I will check that out. So because I've used ChatGPT off my phone to take a picture of like my cluttered kitchen counter, and it had everything down to the jar of Nutella sitting on top of the bread box. So I think we do have some potential for technology to help with these things for sure. So we do have one. Oh, yeah, real quick.
Yeah, Doug, just real quick, I wanted to highlight that more and more so nowadays, over the last couple of years at least, we're finding a lot of custodians are taking photos of company documents, whiteboards. When they're in meetings, they're taking videos of presentations. That's why it's becoming more and more critical for us to investigate photos as well, that are on a device. And that's what Michael spent a huge number of hours going through photos, because this custodian had taken so many photos of documents, not just company documents, personal documents, and it's going through all of that to figure out what needed to be remediated and not. So
Yeah, great point. Yeah, I mean, every time I travel for business, I take a picture of all my receipts so that in case I lose them, I still have them. So yeah, there's the personal, there's the business. It does get convoluted for sure. So our last example, I mean, video surveillance, and Karuna, I'll start with you on this one. In the era where, I mean, everyone has a Ring camera and video surveillance is everywhere, that data can be important evidence in a case. So could you talk about a case where video surveillance evidence came into play?
Sure. So we do a lot of video surveillance cases also. And for this particular case, it's interesting to me, at least. It was the incident, there was an incident that happened in a mall. It was a major incident that happened in a mall, and the mall had a very complex surveillance system in place. there were over 85 cameras placed around different areas of the mall. Some, street facing, some were inside, some were around the mall. So kind of all over. Picture a big mall, and how many cameras you can just think about all over the place. I'm actually going to hand over to Michael so that he can talk about this case.
Okay, Michael.
Yeah, so 85 plus cameras, probably covering maybe a square mile if I had to guess. And we got 48 hours of this coverage delivered to us with very minimal context other than kind of the time of the incident. But our client needed to know, what was the complete timeline of when this individual was on the premises. So we got, I think, 48 hours again of this footage where we pretty much had to find where they originated on the premises, and then track them around the mall for multiple hours they were there. What cameras they're crossing through, and we put together a timeline of, okay, well, they started on camera 6 at 6 p.m. and then tracked them across all these cameras until they were there until like 3 a.m. or something. So multiple hours of trying to see where this person was, and these images on screen might not do it justice, but some of these cameras, we're looking at this person from hundreds of yards away because that's the only camera that might have seen them at that moment. There was like an outside mezzanine here, so one of them was directly across, and we see the individual walking up a staircase, and you can't identify a face from that far, but we at least at that point knew, okay, the individual is wearing this color shirt and has a bald spot or something, and so we're looking at it from this camera angle to say, okay, that's definitely the person. Let's now switch around to camera 42, and then we see them walk around the corner, so now we can confirm, okay, that is what we saw over here. And really just reconstruct a timeline of what this person was doing. And that was, again, a lot of man hours just to figure out where this person came from, where they went. Did they have other people helping them do whatever they were doing? So that was definitely a very interesting one. Whereas typically it's not 85 cameras that we have to dig through the footage for.
Yeah, that's a lot of cameras, and really, like you say, one image, doesn't necessarily paint a picture, but when you put them all together, then you can tell a story, which is really interesting and fascinating. So, all right, so I'll take us to the question slide. I did see a couple of questions, so I'll circle back to those. We have 2 or 3 minutes left. Let's see. One of the questions was, can you download data from a cell phone remotely? I'll open it up to you all to talk about that.
Yeah, I can take this one. And then Greg and Michael, you can add if you want to. We can for an iPhone. We can collect data. We can collect the iCloud backup of the iPhone. We can collect data that's synced to iCloud as well. So iCloud messages, iCloud photos, iCloud Drive, things like that. Some apps you can back up to iCloud, like WhatsApp as an example. So we can remotely collect some data if it's an iPhone. If it's an Android phone, we can't collect text messages from the Google Cloud, but there are some aspects or some data sources that we can collect from just doing a Google takeout as an example. So, but we can't do a full collection of an Android remotely.
Right.
Yeah. So Doug, let me add to that. So we do two major categories of litigation. Corporate litigation, you might call it, or white collar. A goes to B, and you've got documents and text messages, all the standard stuff that's involved in a white collar situation. But we also do a lot of, I guess I'll call it blue collar, but let's talk about accidents in particular. When we really need to know, was the user interacting with the phone? That's metadata, that's logs. It's not really the real data. It's not a text message. It's not a photograph. That data is not available remotely. So if you're in an accident situation and you're trying to get that, we need to get our hands on the physical phone. We need to do the most comprehensive collection we can do. And then we can respond to something as simple as, did they pick up the phone? That's recorded. Did they turn it from landscape to portrait mode? That's documented. That's all that's in the logs. There's a tremendous amount of data in the logs. Did they move from one application to another? So they were looking at Google Maps and they flipped over to the Messenger app. That's logged. All that data is logged, but it's exclusively logged on the phone and it's only there for a few weeks. So
Yeah, no, that's a great point and a great example. I mean, because there are collection apps that can collect some information, but not that kind of information. Like Mode One has a collection capability, and you can collect from certain apps and things. But yeah, that sort of stuff you can't do remotely, and that's a great point. So yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, one more. Let's see. One quick question. We are going a couple of minutes past time. So if you have to leave, we understand. But we will address a couple more questions before we wrap up here. How do you deal with attorneys coming to you with a phone 9 months after the incident and want you to prove all that was happening then? I'll turn it over to you guys. What are your thoughts about that? What can you do when a lot of time has elapsed?
Yeah, we experience this issue far too frequently, unfortunately. We have attorneys come to us for accident cases that happened 2 or 3, 4 years ago. So it's difficult to collect anything that shows the user interaction with the device at the time, unless, of course, the device has been powered off and since the incident and stored away somewhere. We go back to the iCloud backups if there are any. And sometimes we'll collect data from Google if it's an Android, but it's very difficult to figure out what went on physically on the device. I often will say to the attorneys, my clients, I'll ask them to go request the call logs, the call records, the actual phone logs from the service provider, and then sometimes we'll be able to backtrack. But sometimes also we can look at timestamps that are related to GPS coordinates, lat long in photos or other artifacts on the phone that actually have GPS data. And we can kind of try and build a time frame. But, with call logs as an example, call logs aren't on the phone indefinitely. Depending on the device, call logs, there's only a certain number of call logs that can be stored on a cell phone. So say it's 1,000, once the 1,001th call comes in, the first call on the device that came in will, be overwritten by the last one. So it is important to get the logs, the phone logs from the service provider as well. But it's just very difficult to prove what happened on the phone itself.
Yeah, no, it's great point, Karuna. I covered a case, several rulings from Oakley v. MSG Networks involving his getting involved in kind of a dispute with security and being thrown out of MSG. Charles Oakley, the famous New York Knicks basketball player, he changed phones 7 times in 8 years, didn't preserve his text messages or in the cloud either, but MSG subpoenaed the records from his phone as cell phone providers and was able to see at least not the content of his text, but who he was texting with and how his text activity increased with certain people right after the incident, and kind of really illustrate that this was probably important data that was spoliated by him. So yeah, so absolutely great point with the call logs. Yeah,
another
go
comment
ahead,
from
quick.
just a couple of weeks ago, we had a situation where text messages were important. The client wanted to get the deleted text, which is, was obviously a need sometimes. And they're not available on iPhones or Androids anymore, pretty much. We just can't get them there. If you go to the iCloud, even though I said we successfully did it the one time, in general, they're synchronized from the phone and deleted off the iCloud as well. This particular time, we got the text message database off of their MacBook, and the MacBook was full of deleted messages. So we were able to find all those deleted messages. So you have to know where all the data is and look at all the repositories and just try to be very comprehensive when you're trying to find the alternate data sources.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Great point. One last question that's come in real quick, and we'll kind of put a wrap on it after that. Is there any difference in phone imaging between applications like Cellebrite and Oxygen versus taking a native iTunes backup and then importing into Cellebrite, Oxygen, or Magnet? Thoughts on that?
I can answer that. So iTunes backups are available for any, iPhone or iPad. And it's a fairly decent collection. And what these forensic tools do is they kind of build on top of it. So the base of that collection is still an iTunes backup. That's how a lot of the data is being gathered because there's no exploit going on there. Um, it's communicating with the iPhone or iPad the same way iTunes would, and just performing that backup. They are able to then get more logical contents of the phone by essentially kind of having a handshake with the phone. You put in your passcode, say, trust this computer, and then other artifacts on the phone can be requested essentially. So, um, if you don't have messages in your iTunes backup, you can query that off the device. Other repositories on the phone that wouldn't be included in an iCloud backup, and sometimes databases that can be a treasure trove of information that wouldn't typically be included in that iTunes backup, can then be extracted off the phone. So an iTunes backup is a great kind of base collection, um, but the forensic tools can absolutely be a little more on top of that. That can either provide more context or just more data in general.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Great questions, everybody. Great comments. I want to thank all of you for attending today, and for all the great comments and questions. And I want to thank Michael, Greg, and Karuna for their terrific insights and for sharing their forensic tales from the trenches. You should expect to receive a link to the slides as well as a link to the recording of this webinar by sometime tomorrow. So look for that. Thanks and have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thanks all.
Thanks all.